Welcome to Microdose Psychedelic Insights, powered by the Conscious Fund. This is the Psychedelic Insider Series, fireside chats with industry leaders in the psychedelic space.
It's nice to see you again, Judy. The last time I saw you was at the Microdose Virtual Psychedelics Conference, and that's where we were first introduced to you as the CEO of Diamond Therapeutics, and that's in Toronto, Ontario, in Canada. Welcome, Judy.
That's right. Thanks so much. Great to see you again, Alana.
Thanks. So let's start with just really the basics. Can you tell us what your company is doing in the psychedelic sector?
Yeah, sure. So Diamond is developing psilocybin and psilocybin-related molecules. We're developing those with a sub-perceptual philosophy. Non-hallucinogenic doses of psilocybin and molecules that will not induce that reaction. And we're taking a sort of FDA, Health Canada regulatory approach. So really a drug development company by and large. Yeah.
Okay. And sub-perceptual, is that similar or different than microdose, which is a term that we're hearing more and more?
Yeah. I mean, it's a really good point. I mean, people say, are you the microdose company? And we're like, well, I mean, I guess in shorthand terms, you could think of it that way. We are definitely using sub-perceptual doses, so doses, much like the term microdose, where you wouldn't have that hallucinogenic effect. I guess when I talk to my scientific advisors, nobody can really get their head around, scientific advisors like to be precise, right? They're scientists. And so there's a sort of somewhat of a lack of precision implied with microdose. I guess we talk about it as a tenth of a high dose. But what does that really mean? And so we're trying to really get into the nitty-gritty of what the dose will be. But you could think of it that way, for sure.
Okay. Just follow up to that one. What sorts of factors come into play when it comes to, how a dosage will affect one person versus another? Is it metabolism? Is it composition, like body composition, or?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, it could be, male, female. It could be how old you are, what your own metabolic rate is. I think we know that, how people metabolize food and other drugs is kind of dependent on their genetics. So these are some of the big questions we need to wrestle with. And, one of our scientific advisors is very fond of saying there are no shortcuts. Yeah,
I've heard that one. Yeah, there are no shortcuts in nature. I've heard it, yes. I agree.
Yeah, and there are no shortcuts in drug development.
And so just more on a personal note, what inspired you to get started in the psychedelics industry?
Yeah, so I remember the day actually really vividly. Well, there are a few days, I guess, a couple of conversations. But first and foremost, so if you go back to 2007, at that time in my career, I was working on buying royalties on pharmaceuticals. And some of the royalties that we were looking at buying were plant-based, cancer drugs that were plant-based. And so it struck me that, obvious that a good drug could come from a plant, because that's what I was working on. So at the same time, superimposed on that, I read an article which had a really catchy title, like a lot of economist articles do, and it was called The God Pill, right? Which is like almost, crazy to have an article with that title. And that was talking about the work of Roland Griffiths, of course, groundbreaking work at Johns Hopkins University. And then shortly thereafter, I think I must have mentioned that to a friend, and that friend has now become sort of an anonymous co-founder of the company. So I get to say, we have an anonymous co-founder. But I mentioned it to this friend, and he brought to my attention an article by Francesco Moreno at the University of Arizona, which was another study on the use of psilocybin, this time in the treatment of obsessive compulsive disorder. And so it struck both of us at the time, like glaringly obvious, that what we needed to do, again, this is 2007, 2008, right before the financial crisis, it was like glaringly obvious to us that what we should do was take psilocybin, do some what we call medicinal chemistry on it, change up the molecule, keep the good parts, lose the hallucinogenic parts, which I understand are, not necessarily good or bad. So not to put any value judgment on that, but and we could have the world's best drug. But in 2007, 2008, that was not glaringly obvious to anybody. So we sort of parked that idea for a while. That was really the inspiration, were those two articles and scientific papers.
Cool. And so how have you, what are some of the, notes about the evolution of the industry since that time, that you've noticed or that have interested you?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's been an incredible journey since 2007. I mean, at that time, literally, people thought I was from Mars. I really didn't get much of an audience talking about it. Of course, cannabis has been legalized since then. There's been an enormous amount of literature, exciting studies that have been done in the academic world, and then, of course, books that made it to the popular press, Ayelet Waldman, Michael Pollan's books. So, of course, there's been this upsurge of interest in the sector. So it's truly evolved. But even in 2018, when we really started Diamond in earnest, it was still really hard to gain interest. So things have really changed up until today, where we have, even DARPA, which is the U.S. Defense Advanced Research Projects agencies, looking at the sector very carefully. And recognizing the potential of psychedelic compounds. And then, of course, the stock market is taking notice. And we have a sector. I mean, we couldn't talk about having a sector in 2007. We could have imagined a sector. And really not until very recently has that come about. So there's been a tremendous evolution.
For sure. And, you mentioned at that time, of course, 2007, 2008, 2009, we were going through, some real economic turmoil. And, lots of people lost everything, if not at least something. And now we are coming out of a time of isolation, a time of upheaval, unrest. People are really thinking about mental health. So, to compare those two times, we're kind of emerging from some really intense stuff. And definitely we have more of an open mind, it seems, and maybe looser regulations on some of these substances now. Do you think it has a better chance to become legalized or legalized medically sooner right now?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think if we had been talking, 5 or 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, it would have been a question mark whether even cannabis was going to be legalized. So I think that there is definitely a different paradigm now that people are approaching mental health with. I think we're going to see, new drugs, a different attitude. I think there's a general openness at this point, an acceptance of these types of approaches. And also there have been some major failings, right? We haven't had good new drugs for mental health for a good long while, and they don't all work. They don't always all work for all people. So I think there's also a sort of a fatigue among the psychiatric community, looking for new and better drugs. So it's pretty exciting to see all these factors coming together at a time when we really need them. Yeah.
And what kinds of pivots do you foresee for Diamond? Maybe due to, maybe even inspired by this time of isolation or COVID-19.
Yeah. I think this is a sector, if we want to call it a sector now, that is really rapidly emerging. And so when you have these nascent sectors, you do tend to see a lot of pivot. So we're trying to stay very nimble and very flexible. When you look back at the internet, if you go way, way back to 2000 or so, the 1990s, we had companies like Netscape and AOL. I remember I used to use something called LimeWire to download music. I mean, these companies don't exist anymore, right? So I think the main takeaway to me is that when you have a rapidly evolving sector, you're going to have to be very nimble to stay on top of the pivots. And the players that are around now and what you think your strategy is may not end up being your strategy in the long run, right? So, yeah, I think we're gearing ourselves, and we're maintaining sort of eyes open on all fronts as to what that might have to look like. Yeah.
Now that you say that, Judy, I think it would be really good to start talking a little bit about your background. I know that you have a background in finance. You've been working with Mars, which is a center in Toronto. Can you give us your brief CV?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. Thanks. So I've spent my working career really in Toronto, working on the finance side of the life science sector. I did an undergraduate degree, just to go way back, in biology at the University of Toronto. And from there, I went to business school in New York at Columbia, did an MBA in finance, and came back to Toronto and started working for the royalty company that I mentioned, Drug Royalty, now known as DRI. So I spent some time there. I like to say that I've gone earlier and earlier and earlier over the course of my career. Spent some time there. We were buying royalties on pharmaceutical products. So I did that for a number of years. From there, I went to the Royal Bank of Canada, RBC Capital, where we were doing late-stage transactions, still in the life science sector, really pre-IPO, mezzanine round financing for that sector. From there, I went to Genesis Capital, which is an early-stage life science VC group here in Toronto. I'm still really good pals with all of those guys, so a little shout-out to them at Genesis. And I took some time off. I had a young child, took some time off for a couple of years. And when I went back to work, I went back to a group that was called at the time Mars Innovation, which was an academic incubator, again, focusing on life science companies coming out of the University of Toronto, which has a very large medical cluster here. So from late stage pharmaceutical royalties all the way to the really early heavy lifting at the university level. Yeah, so that's my capsule. Background.
Which of those positions do you think primed you the most for setting sails in the nascent psychedelics industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've learned a little bit from each of those experiences, to be honest. Like I said, the early work that I did buying royalties on plant-derived cancer drugs really sort of opened my eyes to the potential for drugs evolving out of nature. So that was, one source of inspiration. And then, of course, all the way down to the present time, the Mars Innovation it's now called TAP in Toronto, but Mars Innovation was a very eye-opening sort of school of hard knocks, working with brand new companies emerging right out of the lab. So it's really been a journey all the way along.
And for those that are joining us from outside of Toronto or maybe outside of Canada, could you describe a little bit what Mars is overall and some of the things people might find there?
Oh, sure. So there's Mars, and then there's Mars Innovation. So Mars is a beautiful old hospital building that's been refurbished and enlarged tremendously. It's at the corner of the University of Toronto, University and College Street. So right smack in the epicenter, really, of the University of Toronto and many of the hospitals that are sort of along University Avenue here in Toronto. So like I said, it is a real sort of life science cluster. The Mars building itself, Mars Discovery District, is meant to be a nexus for inventors, for the venture community, for the legal community, for the pharmaceutical industry, for startups from all sectors, in fact, and is meant to be of assistance to companies, so entrepreneurship training, guidance, introductions to capital, funding programs, and so on. So it's a very large-scale endeavor, and it's really, I think, put Toronto on the map as a hub for the startup ecosystem. The group that I'm in, Mars Innovation, now known as TAP, is very dedicated, solely dedicated to the academic startup community. So companies that are emerging out of the University of Toronto and teaching hospitals. Yeah, very exciting. And I think what's going on in Toronto in general, in the startup world and in the psychedelic sector is tremendously exciting. So Toronto's really evolved as well, not just the sector, but Toronto's really evolved into a thriving hub for these types of companies. So it's great to see.
Yeah. What have you had any thoughts about what has contributed to that, or are you just happy to see it happen?
Well, I'd like to think that the Mars building and Mars environment has contributed greatly to it. Of course, I think it's a trend worldwide. I think young people are becoming creative about how they approach their own futures, and there's no shortage of ideas. It's thrilling to see the ideas that are coming out of the next generation. So, yeah, it's an interesting worldwide phenomenon, I think.
Yeah. Well, speaking of young people, did you? I mean, you probably didn't, as a young person, expect specifically that you would be in the psychedelic sector, but where did you see yourself?
That's a really interesting question. I have had a bit of an inventive streak all along. I've invented a couple of things. I won't go into too much detail on them along the way.
You should. You should.
But, if you're, yeah, I can tell you about a couple of them. But I think if your mind is prone to playing with ideas, then that's something that probably is an innate characteristic, and I certainly have that. So it doesn't surprise me to be in this situation. Yeah, I'm a real idea person.
Okay, all right. So, was your style creating things in the kitchen, creating things in the garage, more chemistry based? What was your creation style as you were growing up?
Oh yeah, that's interesting. I mean, definitely. So definitely, Diamond comes out of my work experience, and yeah, sort of the fascination, like I said, based on those articles that I read early on. No, I would say no to chemistry. I'm not a chemist, and I'm not much of a cook. My family will tell you that. But you see things happening all around you. So, for example, many years ago, it struck me that an interesting thing to do would be to have your own television station. That the internet, you could use the internet to stream, and you didn't have to have a CRTC or whatever it is in other countries. The CRTC license in Canada. There were some television shows that I'd been really fond of as a child, and so I put those together, packaged them up with a couple of friends of mine, and got the licensing rights for them. It was all done properly, and started something called Bunny Ears TV. So it was I think just a general, if you have a playful sensibility and creative mind, you sometimes want to see your brain children evolve into an actual product. So we ran Bunny Ears for a while. Quietly. It wasn't a tremendous commercial success. It was amazing fun.
Yeah, that's Bunny Ears, right? Bunny Ears?
Yeah, Bunny Ears TV.
Oh, okay, I like it.
So yeah, it's not been limited to the drug development sector, but yeah.
I like it. Do you get to kind of use your creativity in many ways through Diamond?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I've had to be very creative. I always thought to myself, I will start Diamond and I will self-fund it. And, at some point I thought maybe, I would be in a position financially to do that. But Diamond has actually been bootstrapped. And so I had to be really creative about starting the company with relatively limited resources. And so it did take quite some creativity. The really interesting thing about that is when you do things that way, you meet people who are very like-minded and who are attracted to the same projects as you are. And so that's been one of the tremendous benefits of starting Diamond the way it got off the ground, was that the people that are involved and remain involved are doing it because they want to be involved. And so it's been amazing to build a company from that starting point.
Yeah, what are some of the ways that you raised money from the early stages to today, and do you see that evolving in the future?
Yeah. So luckily we're past the bootstrap phase at this point. Early on, we applied for a grant from the Ontario Brain Institute, which has supported some of our early animal studies. So that was, there's grants, there's in-kind contributions. So many of the scientists, the people who were instrumental in filing some of the IP with us, did that in exchange for equity. And on the manufacturing side as well, we were able to exchange some pretty heavy-duty expenses for equity in the company. So, yeah.
Okay. And are other companies are you keeping an eye on other companies and how they're raising money and what the other models are? And do you see other models and think like, oh, I kind of wish I did that? Or, I wish we adopted that earlier.
Yeah. We'll sort of fast forward to where we are today. So we've put the bootstrap phase behind us. We've raised some money. I think we're getting really good interest on both sides of the border, and meaning Canada and the US, and as well some interest from abroad. So I think we're in a really good position to be flexible about how we go forward with our fundraising for the next round. So yeah, I think there are a lot of avenues that are possible and hold fruit, and we'll be exploring some of that going forward.
And sorry, I don't know if we covered this. How old is Diamond? Oh, I think we talked about when it got started, but can you take us a little bit through the timeline and where things kind of started accelerating to where you're at now?
Yeah, sure. So we started the company in, like I said, bootstrap phase in 2018. During this period of time, I was learning, obviously. It struck me that the time was now right with the legalization of cannabis upon us, a different attitude and a different environment, and as well a lot of the publications that I mentioned. Started putting together the scientific advisory board, started applying for the grants that I mentioned, started doing some animal work, filing IP, and so on. Started going out to the investment community late last year, gathered some great interest from a great group of investors, and just finished off the seed round sort of as we're speaking. So it's been about, I would say, from idea, where we were 2.5 years ago, and then pen to paper about 18 months ago. It's been about that time. I think we're in great shape now in terms of the team, the science that's around us, the IP that we have. So we're emerging at this point sort of out of stealth mode and into a real corporate entity, which is amazingly exciting, as you can imagine, given how long I've been thinking about this. So yeah.
For sure. And so my next question is, were there signs along the way that kept giving you hope? What sorts of things were you tuned into to, keep that momentum going?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I was very, very determined that there had to be a better way to develop drugs, right? And the studies that I had read all pointed to incredible potency of these compounds. So there was sort of an inner conviction that drove me. And then along the way, every paper that you would read, every sign from the community that the attitudes were shifting, the books that have been written, there have been a lot of signposts along the way, for sure. But it's always been driven by this inner conviction. This is something that has to be explored. And the conversations that I've had with the scientists around us corroborated that the conversations were sort of like, Judy, like there's something here, like let's do this. There's got to be something. And so of course when you're dealing with neuroscientists who know something about this stuff and have developed drugs in the space before, and you hear that, it sort of encourages you to keep going and to keep at it. So there's never really been a moment where I didn't think we should be doing this. Yeah, quite the opposite.
Yeah, and so kind of keeping that in mind, like how do you build a team of like-minded people who are, and trying to, say, let's do this thing in this space that I think might come to fruition, but like, it's still not quite legal yet.
Yeah. So, what I started doing was talking to some really trusted close friends about it. And they would often say to me, oh, you should really talk to this person. You should really talk to this person. So, some of the conversations, obviously, it's a lot of networking is what it boils down to. Some of the conversations didn't go anywhere. And then the conversations that stuck, I found people were really enthusiastic. I have one scientific advisor with Diamond who, we would talk for hours. We would talk for hours and hours and hours. We had standing calls on Friday afternoons, and we would talk for 2 or 3 or 4 hours. There's just a level of fascination. And for a lot of people that grew up with the psychedelics as a contraband category, the idea that there could be something there that was really beneficial is absolutely fascinating. And of course, to a neuroscientist, the mechanisms of action aren't really quite known. I think we're getting closer, but this is a fascinating area. And some of the scientists that we're working with are driven by simple questions, really simple questions, like what does it mean to be happy? And so when you have that as a driving force in your mind, one of the basic human conditions, happiness, like what does it take to make us happier? Of course, you have a group of like-minded people that coalesce, that resonates. So it's been amazing to build that group of people around the company.
Yeah. Are you able to talk about some of the members of your team?
Yes, for sure. So one of the people that I'm talking about, the one that I would speak to for hours and hours and hours, is a guy named Jamie Tyler at Arizona State University. We have Joe Moscow at Northwestern University, one of the developers of a ketamine-like substance with great success. We have Jeffrey Strauss, who's based in New York City, although I think now he's hanging out of town, and has a fantastic track record with pharma, with Pfizer and Lundbeck, on the preclinical side. So those are just a few of the people that we're working with. I'm really privileged to be working with such amazing geniuses.
Yeah, there are some really incredible people in this space. And I have to agree with you. Almost everyone I've met just truly wants with all their heart to be in this space. They really, truly believe it. And enthusiasm is kind of the common characteristic of everyone, I feel. There has been a question about inclusivity in this space, and we're talking about, of course, having diverse, teams like C-suites, diverse labs. What are your thoughts on inclusivity and diversity in this space? Can it be better? And how does that happen?
Yeah, I think it can be better on a number of fronts. And of course, given the backdrop of the past couple of weeks, I think we owe it to ourselves as individuals and as corporations to take inclusivity very, very seriously and try to do a lot better. It's sobering times. I think we all have to try our best. And I do want to say inclusivity can mean many things, right? It can be race, it can be belief, and of course it's really of paramount importance to us in this sector that it's also sort of mental health, right? To be inclusive of people who may have different states of mental health, and to try to make sure that we're welcoming them into the workplace and or dealing with people's issues. I mean, we all have mental health issues. It's just the state of being a human being. I think it's important to make room for all of that in the workplace as well. So I think we all need to do better on that and take it very seriously.
Yeah, just on that note, do you have maybe some advice for the young, up-and-coming or emerging entrepreneur who hasn't started hiring, but who's kind of learning the fundamentals of HR, and they don't quite have an HR manager to help them out yet? What are your what are your personal best practices?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think we have to make sure that we are hiring with diversity in mind. It's not always easy, but it's something that we're actively thinking about consciously, and reaching out to people who, may be of interest, maybe, it's so easy to find people these days. I think we can ask our friends, we can look on the social media, find people relatively readily, and to broaden our horizons as to how we do that. So I think as long as it's top of mind, people will fill the spots appropriately, but it does need to be a conscious decision.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, actually going off of that and going and keeping in mind, conscious decisions and intentional decisions. And these are things that, are not just coming into the business lexicon, but the intention has been a word that has been ingrained in psychedelic medicine for a long time. So, and also drawing on your varied business background, what should new players avoid, or what should the psychedelics industry avoid?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like I said before, I think the issue of shortcuts, I mean, we are dealing with people's health and well-being, and that's got to be of paramount importance. And so we really have made a commitment to our stakeholders that will be our guiding force. And I do think that that's something that the sector needs to adopt, and hopefully everybody is looking at it that way. I think it's an obvious statement almost. Of course, it's tempting to take shortcuts when there's easy money and when the hype starts to get tempting, and you're tempted to make certain things happen to be able to tell a story. Business is not always straightforward. Drug development is not always straightforward. So I think maintaining the integrity of avoiding that is what we need to aim for.
And part of your process includes animal trials. What sorts of things would be pretty devastating to cut corners on that Diamond is very adamant about, taking the intentionally long route to get the answer?
Yeah, so I think it's really a soup to nuts philosophy. So everything from picking the indication, making sure that the trials are designed carefully, making sure that toxicity studies are done carefully, making sure, we're talking about inclusivity, but also that the trials are designed to meet the needs of different people, different, as you said, metabolisms, different ages, different sexes. So I think it really, it's something that needs to be addressed throughout the drug development program, and very, very carefully.
What's the expected timeline from beginning to end for development?
Well, it depends where you're starting, right? I mean, if you're starting with a brand new concept or a brand new molecule, you can spend 3 or 4 or 5 years getting ready for clinical trials, right? So it can be a very long process. And of course, if you then go into clinical trials, phase 1, toxicity studies, phase 2, dosing, phase 3, safety and efficacy, I mean, this can be a 10-year, 12-year process. So it's a long process. If you're starting with molecules that are relatively safe, so I know a lot of the psilocybin and other trials in the sector can leapfrog a little bit, but still need to be done very, very carefully. So it depends where you're starting.
And at Diamond, do you start with psilocybin? Does Diamond have to buy psilocybin, or Are you synthesizing a psilocybin?
Yeah, so we are synthesizing it. We're synthesizing it under GMP, so it's completely synthetic. It's a chemical entity, yeah. And under GMP means, suitable for drug trials, yeah.
And I will follow that up with a question from the audience. This is from Denny Gartler, who asks, Judy, what market niche or niches is Diamond working in or toward?
I'm going to have to ask you to...
What market niches is Diamond working in or toward?
Sorry, Alana. And now, of course, I'm having trouble with the phone. Hold on a second. I'm just going to try to switch to computer audio. Can you hear me? I'm so sorry. Maybe you can try again.
Okay. So the question, I already deleted, so hopefully I remember it. Which niche markets is Diamond working in or toward?
Oh, okay. So,
oh, now we can't hear you. We can't hear you. I'm sorry. Can you hear me? Okay. Switching to computer audio. And I can only hear myself. I can hear you. I can't hear you. Oh, can we get tech support? Oh, this is too bad. This is happening right when the questions are rolling in.
okay, I can hear you.
I can hear you now.
Fantastic. Sorry, so I was trying to say, sorry guys, this is the second time this has happened to me, and I don't know what's going on with my Wi-Fi or what it is. I'm so sorry.
It's not you. Blame it on the technology.
All right, it's the internet ether stuff. So we haven't really disclosed what our indications are yet. So obviously, it's something in mental health. Has to do, generally speaking, I would say, with anxiety for our first indication, but we haven't really disclosed any niche market.
Thank you.
Or indication.
Ask the next question from the audience, since I already have it up. This is from Shaheen Etmanen. I shouldn't have even tried to pronounce your name. I'm sorry if I got it wrong. I'm really sorry. Given that psilocybin is still still counted as a Schedule I drug, what business models do you foresee to break through in the current model as a viable business?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So obviously the front runners are doing trials that would involve psilocybin being dosed in clinic situation. And of course, we all understand the logic of that, given the nature of the question. I think I'll be bold and say that for Diamond, we would love to see that psilocybin could emerge, I would say, after the proper safety and efficacy studies are done, could emerge as a drug that people could take in a non-clinical setting, so at home. And so I think that's going to be a longer road for us. but something that we're really passionate about, and that's the approach that we're taking through the clinic and with the regulators.
Okay. And that's kind of more of a medical route. I mean, is your mind closed off to other routes? Have you considered other, other ways to move these medicines forward besides the medical one?
Yeah, so we ourselves haven't. So as Diamond, we're really a medical sort of regulatory pathway company. It's going to be interesting, though. I don't think that precludes, and I do want to say I don't think that precludes other routes of people taking psilocybin. I don't think anybody should be going to jail for taking it, or other psychedelics for that matter. So it's just what our team is good at. And I think that what we're thinking, our thought process is, if it's a drug and we can prove safety and efficacy, then it will really have the chance to reach the greatest number of people who would be counting on a prescription for it. And so that's our approach. But of course, there are many other approaches that can exist in parallel.
Yeah, I don't disagree at all. And what do you think of some of the, different, businesses or nonprofits that have emerged from retreats to, different types of clinics? Have any, kind of impressed you or inspired you, or kind of made you perk up?
Yeah, I've been aware of many of these other businesses. Of course, I haven't been personally involved in them, but I mean, look, everybody's aiming for the same thing. Everybody's aiming for their own spiritual path, their own betterment, relief from trauma, and so I think that this is, what we're starting to see here is a real change in the attitude toward mental health. And so whether it comes in a pill, in a clinic, in a retreat, through reflection, through a botanical, through a ritual, through a guided ritual, or rituals with friends or therapists, I think, unfortunately, as I was saying, this is the human condition, right? We have stuff to deal with, and it's not easy going through life. And so the more, the better.
Yeah. And actually, I was wondering about, is Diamond involved in any, are there any partnerships with any nonprofits or kind of a thought that will happen in the future? Is that something that is in the pipeline or happening already?
Yeah, we're just beginning to explore how to do some of that and how to make those connections and intersections. I am going to be doing a lot more of that in the future. And if there's anybody listening that, I can reach out to, I think I would love that. We have some philosophies that we're working on in-house in terms of how we intersect with the universities and with the nonprofits. And so we look forward to more of that cooperation.
Amazing. That's great to hear. I love it because, it is all about mental health, and you can't really talk about mental health without, all the disparity and all the opportunities to give back. So once again, we'll make sure that we have a way to get in touch with Judy for anyone who has an idea on a partnership for them. And then on the financial side, what sorts of advice would you give to investors who are just getting into psychedelics and are looking for the right projects to
Yeah, well, I've always had the philosophy, I've been on the investor side, of course, so I've always had the philosophy that you pick the team and the people that you work with, that you respect, that you admire, and that you think can stay agile. especially in an area like this where things are rapidly developing, the business model that you think you have today may be a different business model than what you emerge with, right? And I remember a long, long time ago learning about Federal Express, and Federal Express started out as a fax company, and nobody ever thought it would end up being this international next day delivery service. So I think you have to be ready to pivot and pick the people, pick the team that you think can do that in an effective manner.
And I will probably make this my last question. And if anyone from the audience has any final questions, this is your chance to send it in. I will ask Judy, what are some of the best and worst aspects of being a CEO of a psychedelics company?
Okay, that's an interesting question. So, I mean, this is really exciting. As I've told you in many different ways, this is something that I've been thinking about for a long, long time. And so being able to make a dream come true and work with such incredibly curious and intelligent people that have so much expertise to bring to the question has really been a privilege. So that's the really good part of it. And it's all fun, and it's thrilling, frankly. The worst part is my house is really, really messy. I'm not going to spin the camera around.
That's the realness that we want, though.
There's piles of stuff all over the place. So it's a busy time.
That's good. It's part of being human, right? There's one more question, another one from Shayin. Can you comment on psilocin and baeocystin contribution as well?
I think I heard the question correctly. The contribution of psilocin and baeocystin?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what I understand, and again, I'm not the scientist in the team, what I understand is that psilocybin breaks down in the body into psilocin. And so that is actually the active component of when you take psilocybin, either in mushrooms or in chemical format. The effect on your brain and on your being in general is really the active component, which is psilocin. Baeocystin and some of the other drugs that may be present in the natural occurring mushrooms, I'm not so familiar with, so I'm just not going to say anything about that. I really don't know.
Fair enough. That was all for the audience questions. Was there anything else you wanted to impress upon us? We probably have a varied audience of, maybe investors, maybe entrepreneurs, and people who are generally interested in psychedelics. Coming from, you're in Toronto, in Canada, a place where psychedelics are being, developed rather quickly, even before they're 100% legal. What would you like to impress upon our audience before we close this out? Oh, and also,
yeah, I think.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So obviously, there's a tremendous amount of enthusiasm for the sector. It's amazing to see that. I hope that the dialogue around mental health changes as a result of it. We are, after all, that is what we are aiming for here. Again, just with the backdrop of what's going on, I think let's approach this sector in the most inclusive way possible as we go forward. We take all the enthusiasm and all the excitement and turn it into something that can really radically change how each and every one of us is living. So it's an exciting time. I encourage everybody that's interested to get more involved. Reach out, pick up the phone, network. I think it's an inclusive community.
And how shall our audience get in touch with you going forward, particularly if they have, I suppose, a social initiative to talk to you about?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to take emails. We haven't really launched our website yet. So like I said, we have been in stealth mode, but it's just judy@diamondthera.com. So maybe we can post that on the link on Microdose, but I think that's the best way. I'm happy to to take any questions. And I do have a LinkedIn profile under my name, Judy Blumstock.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here with us, Judy. It's been really nice to get to know you lately. I hope to very soon see you in person and have coffee. And yeah, I really like your energy. I really like speaking with you, and it's really inspirational to just hear your perspective of things in the industry.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for allowing me the time. And yeah, I do hope to meet you in person. That would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We have been recording this, so if you wanted a copy of that, we can definitely send that to you. Thank you for attending and giving us some of your time on your Wednesday, and we hope that you will join us for the next Fireside Chat.
Thanks for joining the Psychedelic Insider series, brought to you by Microdose and the Conscious Fund. Visit our website at www.microdose.buzz.